Well, I'm here with Anna.
Hi.
Anna, and Erica.
Hi,
It's good to see you both. We're talking about teaching in relation to the kind of poems that one encounters in ModPo. Along the way, we encounter Bernadette Mayer's super famous, at least in our circle, super famous writing experiments. And what I thought I would do, and it might be fun, is I picked out 4 of those writing experiments. And what I want to ask you to do, and it can be both of you each time or just one of you, briefly say why it is likely to be good to have your students do this in class, specifically good. I think Bernadette actually had classroom teaching in mind, but she also had just people struggling to be writers in mind, generally. But I'm asking specifically about students. So, all right, so here's the first one. I picked 4 out. Your job is to tell us why that would be good to use in a classroom.
Cool.
Choose a subject you would like to write about. She puts about in quotes. Then attempt to write a piece that absolutely avoids any relationship to that subject. Get someone to grade you. Okay. Erica, you want to take a stab at that? I'm sure you do this. I sort of do it.
So I think that an assignment like that does a couple of things. So by picking a subject that you want to write about and then writing something that avoids the subject, I think that there's a pretty good likelihood that you being the student will figure out what they're actually interested in writing about.
Which is not what the teacher told you to write about.
Yeah, instead of kind of repeating what they think that they're writing about. And then when you introduce the getting someone else to grade you, there is this playful addition of some kind of stakes where, grades are supposed to mean something, so you're being evaluated, but the evaluation is also playful. So I think that it would free up a student to experiment and really see writing an essay as not something that's a total drag.
That's really great. Grade you on what? If the student doesn't know, the student knows that you didn't write about the assignment, then the student's work to grade you is going to be first to discern what it is that you wrote about, which is a genuine intellectual inquiry.
Please grade me on a scale of 1 to dolphin. Right.
Anna, you want to add something to that? Because then we can start the second one with you, if you want to add briefly to that.
Okay. No, I mean, that just sounds like, first of all, it sounds like a lot of fun, and I think we should all do it. And secondly, I think it will challenge you to think about what it means to write about anything, right? And to sort of question, and if you're able to question that notion in your own work, then you're also then able to question it in the work of others, and that's going to make you an even better reader.
Yeah. Yep. So over the years, my students have sometimes taken up my somewhat bullshit, somewhat sincere rhetoric about the classroom being a free space and how, in a course I teach on genocide, anything that's not authoritarian is probably a good thing. You've got to learn this on your own. You can't be, it would be ironic to be told how to avoid authoritarianism.
Right.
A paradox. And then some students over the years refuse to do the exam, or they take the exam question in whatever way they want, and it would be absolutely silly for me to say, you get a B- because you didn't do what I told you to do in contexts like that.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of little uprisings that we hope our students will engage in. All right, Anna, here's number 2, Bernadette Mayer experiment. And this gets a little deeper into classes as safe spaces and places where students do work that they don't feel comfortable doing outside a certain classroom.
Okay.
Write what is secret, then write what is shared. Experiment with writing each in 2 different ways: veiled language, direct language.
Ooh.
So she's talking about 2 kinds of writing. First you write what is secret, and then you write what is shared. By shared, I think she means commonly known as opposed to secret.
Right. I guess that would be my first question is like, what does shared mean to the person who takes on this experiment? Does that mean, like, I have a secret, but I also have something that I've shared with Erica? So, like, Erica knows this thing, but she doesn't know this other thing. So, again, I guess the value of doing that for a student would be to think about to what extent any knowledge is common, right? Or to what extent something that feels secret to me wouldn't feel secret to some. I don't know. That's hard.
How do you write about something that's secret? That's what she's asking here. She's asking you to use what she calls veiled language.
Right. I mean, my response to that is like, if I don't write it, right? If I have a secret, I'm probably not going to write about it because it's a secret.
Right, so she's asking you to write what is secret. So
Right.
it's asking you to be vulnerable, but she's giving you veiled language.
But she's giving me veiled language to do it in, yeah.
Right. I mean, I keep thinking that Franz Kafka did nothing but write about secrets in a veiled language.
Sure.
Partly because he didn't really want to face what the secrets were that were bothering him.
That's kind of a psychological question as much as it is a writing question.
It is. And then she associates direct language with what is shared. Erica, your thoughts on this?
I'm thinking about a colleague of mine who often begins a course by having students write down what's secret and then rip it up and then burn it. And I think that he does that as a way to release something or make space for whatever learning is about to happen in whatever course it is.
Right. So you can have had the experience of writing about a secret, but you don't have to share it.
Right. And I would suspect, though, that the language being used in that context would be direct. I think that the veiled language adds in a really interesting swerve because I think that it would help students to think about the difference between veiled and direct language and that you can, as writers, you make the choice.
Well, she offers the choice. The way she sets it up is experiment with writing each in two different ways. So you would write secret stuff in veiled language and secret in direct, and you'd write shared in veiled and shared in direct. Okay, two more. Erica, this one's for you to start. One of my favorites. Diagram a sentence in the old-fashioned way. By diagram, she means, set out the syntax and identify the way it works. Diagram a sentence in the old-fashioned way. If you don't know how, I'll be happy to show you, she says. If you do know how, try a really long sentence, for instance, from Melville. Now, what could possibly be good about that? Not something you would do, I take it.
I don't know how to diagram a sentence.
Okay,
so I
well,
would
you have to ask Bernadette.
I need Bernadette's help.
Well, I'll start. I'll suggest it, and you guys can respond to what I say. Clearly, the thing about diagramming sentences is that you get into the atomic parts or the molecular parts of it. And so Herman Melville or Henry James or John Donne or Joan Didion, where the hell did this sentence, or, the aforementioned Kafka, where's this thing going? How did this get constructed? But to diagram it means to get kind of inside it and to see it almost as a scaffolding or a construction, rather than something that's conveying the freight of message, of content.
Well, what's
so
really
it's kind
cool
of a way
about
of
that,
getting into formal consciousness.
That totally. And I mean, what's great about that as an exercise is it teaches, like, when would you experience diagramming a sentence, right? Probably in like some kind of grammar workbook.
Not anymore, but that's where I learned it.
Sure, that's where I learned it.
7th grade.
Yeah.
Mrs. Meadow, Meddaughh. She didn't want you to misspell her name. Does that say everything?
Yeah. But that's where I learned it too, in a workbook. And the sentences that are in the workbook are already like correct, right? Because when you diagram them, you're supposed to learn something about how sentences in English are put together. Subject, verb, object, right? Dependent clause, subject, predicate, all that stuff. But if you're doing something like a Milton sentence, Milton is breaking all kinds of rules and doing all kinds of crazy things. So actually by diagramming a sentence of Milton, you're learning that the workbook version of diagramming a sentence isn't going to teach you jack about how to actually put a poetic sentence.
There was a really great Freudian slip in what you just said, because she says Melville and you went to Milton.
Oh, oops.
Which is great.
I heard Milton when you said it, so I had it in my head.
I know you did, but think about what that means. Because, Milton's really all about the imponderable, gigantic evil and sin.
Yeah.
and Melville's sentence tend to lead you into an abyss. And they do that grammatically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, last one for both of you, okay? And this is very oblique. She doesn't really spell this one out, and I would love for you to go back home to Bard and try this. Okay, here it is. This is the sum total of it. What is communicable now? What more is communicable? By now, I think she means currently. As of now, what is communicable?
Yeah.
And what more is communicable? What else could be communicated that isn't now? I love that one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Teach that tomorrow.
That's real meta.
Yeah.
Can we try to do it together? What is she getting at here? I mean, first of all, an exploration of what can be communicated currently, what in the state of human affairs is translatable into communication.
Right.
Now, and then the question is there something more?
Yeah. That isn't currently being said or that needs to
Or
be said.
seemingly can't be said because people say,
Right.
well, you can't say that.
Right. Or you can't say it that way anymore.
To quote Ashbery, you can't say it that way anymore. Right? He's being a little funny about fashion. So what more is there? I mean, this is...
Well, communicable is really interesting too, because when we think about, like I'm not very good at communicating like my feelings, for instance. It means like you have a hard time verbalizing them or explaining or sharing like with other people. So the question of communication, I think we can sort of take that at a number of different levels. Communications as like literally the phone lines at Penn are out today, for instance, right? Those lines of communication.
They're back, but yes.
They're back, they're back now, but they were out today, right? So the lines of communication are literally down. So like there's a number of ways that we can think about communication as a process or as a literal fact of utilities. But all of those involve connection between people, right? Like it doesn't matter if I communicate something if no one else is listening.
In the dream of a common language, in the logical positivist dream, in the dream of people who created Esperanto, in the dream of 5 minutes in the 20th century and probably most of the 19th century, there was this idea that if we could just communicate clearly to each other, then conflict will be resolved and we won't murder each other because it's all about miscommunication. The rest of the 20th century and the 21st century, I think, has shown that that ain't enough. And the kind of poetry that we admire is about duende, about the spirit, about the liminal spaces, about irrationality, about Kabbalistic tendencies, about irrational elements of poetry, all those things that you can't put your finger on. So this is a real statement. So how do you, this goes back to general conversations that we have about teaching through this kind of material. It goes back to what the purpose of the classroom is. So I invite each of you to say a final word about this. If what is communicable now is the equivalent of, this is what I can teach you based on our current knowledge about how we communicate, and that your real goal in the classroom is to get students to think about how there's so much more to do. How does this speak to you?
That's such a wonderful invitation, right? I mean, the idea that you can foreground your own, like this is where my knowledge is. Like my knowledge feels like this kind of pool right here. And I invite you to like dig a trench so it goes over there. That's a really wonderfully generous way to approach this question of what do we know as humans, what do we know as writers, as artists, and what do you have to bring to that conversation?
Sort of like Ashbery on Stein. It's not really meaningful or worthwhile to do what can already be done.
Right.
The poem or the classroom should be a place where we should spend 90% of our time talking about things that we don't currently know what to do. Erica, your final thought on all this?
I'm playing around with like how it would actually work in the classroom, and I think that questions like these, it would be really interesting to pose them at the start of a class and then to pose them again right before you end.
Yeah.
So to begin by asking, what's communicable now, what more is communicable, and then you have the entire class session happen, and then you pose the same questions again. Because it feels as though it's not only a generative invitation to participate in kind of a collective exchange of language, but it's also, sharing in the fact that what's communicable is always changing, and there's always more.
There's always more.
Yeah.
Lots
and there's
more.
never enough time.
Yeah.
I guess my final thought is very mundane. It's about flipping the classroom. One of the benefits of flipping the classroom is to get all of the communicable nowness out of the class session itself. So you've already prepared through videos or through webinars or through whatever, the stuff that you can find on the web that I've organized for you. That's all prepared, and that's what is communicable now up to this point. And now we are going to reserve the entire class time talking about what else can be done, and that's generally going to be generated by them.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Val.